for joining me. Now, I hope you like the slide. Someone was asking me the other day about defining what a team is, and the idea of people coming together for a general purpose seemed to me to be pretty much what we should be talking about, and the idea that they're heading in one direction, well, in this case downwards, enabled by gravity, but you get the point, and also that they are in some way linked together. So this piece of work starts around about May-June 2019, when I was making some general inquiries around with previous customers, some with whom we've been working for the last 15 years, and then later in the year, so maybe around about autumn, September time, we were approached by an existing client who wanted just to do a bit of sampling with members of their team to find out where they were at with their term in terms of their well-being, their perspective on what had happened to them over the last few months, and it was felt that a third party might throw a slightly different light on those conversations. I think it's interesting to bear in mind that although this started in May-June 2020, I have a feeling that we'll be still having this conversation into 2021 and beyond. Okay, so do you remember this? It was when the beast from the east struck us, and it was pretty terrible for a few days, wasn't it? And it paralysed us in much the same way as COVID-19 has. However, there is a difference, and it's this: we all kind of knew or know what to do in icy conditions. We don't necessarily do it well, but we know what we should be doing, and we can adjust our routines pretty quickly, mostly. However, we know it will be over at some point, and in the UK we generally expect that it will be over pretty soon. So whatever happens is pretty much temporary, and we can make some interim arrangements. And snow days, can you remember them from school? They were always pretty good, weren't they? And I've carried that through to the office environment too, and getting a snow day or an early finish, it just felt great. That was never going to be the case, was it, with COVID-19, and I'm sure that many of us can remember the build-up to this. So let's just take a look at what might have been going on then in the build-up to the eventual decision to close things down in the first lockdown in March. So to continue the previous image of the beast from the east, we'd had the weather forecast, hadn't we? There had been quite a lot of general conversation in early March. Then the news was becoming more and more occupied with what was happening in Italy with lockdown there and some of the truly awful images that were emerging. So we'd had a chance, if you like, to get the mindset in place. So we thought we'd had, if you like, the beast from the east is coming and it's going to be cold. I don't think any of us at that point would have imagined that the lockdown and the ramifications of this would have carried on for so long. In fact, if you think about the conversations you were having then, we were probably thinking, oh well, this should be over, we should be seeing the end of it by, I don't know, about June time, something like that. And when that didn't happen, that actually caused quite a dip in morale. What we have found out from our conversations is that the manner in which leaders, managers and supervisors communicated their expectations to their teams in those early days were absolutely critical. And the ones who chose a path that put checks on wellness in front of checks on performance seem to have done very well in maintaining this idea of team connectedness and morale. So when I spoke to people, here were some of the positives they were telling me about. It became easier to manage childcare, and that, as you will be aware, with children with schools being closed, that became increasingly significant as we went through lockdown. For some, there was a capacity to take themselves off into another room and get on with their work without any distractions. Interesting, because they were referring to some of the distractions they experience at work. That can I just have a minute, and what really meant is, can I just occupy the next hour and a half of your time? People were taking well-being breaks. They were actually timetabling 20 minutes, half hour away from their desk, and or maybe going for a jog or a walk, taking a dog out. I saw a lot of worn-out dogs during the early days of lockdown. People talked to me about how they had recovered time that was lost to commutes, whether that was by rail, bus or car. One person told me that they'd got 4 hours of their lives back and they didn't necessarily want to give them up again. Some respondents were very convinced that the contribution in reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, was a major benefit of the lockdown, and maybe more disturbingly, some had actually got out of the way of what they felt were unduly aggressive managers. I would add here that if that doesn't raise some alarm bells, it should. Let's just step back from it. What we've got here is people saying, my life at work is so miserable because of the oppressive management I feel I'm subjected to. It's actually better for me to be working from home in the context of an uncertain but vicious pandemic that's causing misery across the whole of the population. It's actually better for me to be out of the work environment in that context. That, I think, merits some serious conversations and some examination about the way we relate to each other as human beings in the workplace and beyond. And just in the flow of life, there's a downside to every upside, isn't there? One of the things we found out from only a few people was this idea that work is actually their only escape from pretty crushing loneliness, and you can be lonely amongst people, so there's people who are feeling isolated in their home situation, and work was their place where they had their social connectivity, they had their social identity. We heard too about challenging domestic relationships, where situations were tense. There were indications of the possibility of domestic abuse, and this was put under greater focus by virtue of the fact that people were spending more time together in sometimes quite compressed and quite controlled and claustrophobic environments. Other things happened too. I spoke to people who'd gone from back-to-back Zoom or Teams or Skype meetings and were absolutely shattered, and there are reasons for that. We are just not designed to interact with each other in that way. Ask how much informal learning takes place in the workplace, and I think the answer to that is largely most of it. It's by exposure to our colleagues, by people who've experienced the job, maybe done it before, can recontextualise, reframe stuff for us, or just give us an opportunity to talk situations through and out and come up with some, co-designed solutions. Leading on to that keenly felt absence of workplace connectivity, this is where I laugh, it's where I cry, and it's actually it's part of my true identity exists here. A large part of my true identity exists here. We also have come across the dreaded email misunderstandings, and we just need to understand that it's two-dimensional, and very often it doesn't get over the emotions that we would like to present. So what we've had here is people who've received an email, and their reaction to it is, how dare you make that assumption? And maybe instead of picking up the phone and having a conversation, another email's gone back, and you can see where this is going, can't you? That has led to some quite difficult exchanges for some of the people we spoke to. There's some pretty straightforward things that we've been speaking about as we step into the light of returning back to a different but maybe more recognisable structure to our working lives. We spoke about the layout of the work environment, and just some ideas there about how we could work, where we could work, what those designated spaces could look like. And believe me, we've had some pretty creative input there. If there are going to be less people in the workplace at any one time, does that give us some opportunities to think about staggered handover times? Where could that happen? What would it look, sound and feel like? Who would coordinate it? Plenty to think about there. There's also a lot to think about what's not been said on the step forward list, and the one I think we really do need to be aware of is the incubated anticipation, negative anticipation that some people will have about coming back to work. What sort of environments are they going to be stepping into, and what old issues are going to be reawakened for them, and have we got a process by which we can begin to establish people's level of happiness in the workplace, and maybe we can start thinking about that alongside performance, but not necessarily in a pejorative way, more of an explanatory way that allows us some sort of development to take place. I'm also thinking about for folks coming back into the workplace, that they are actually leaving what's been quite a comfortable situation, within which new regimes and ways of living their lives have developed, and it's going to be a challenge for them to leave that, even though they're going back to what less than a year ago was their normal working life. So there is an awful lot to consider, and we are a long way, I think, from having those vital conversations. Okay, so thanks for joining me. I hope you found this interesting. It certainly was for me in gathering some of that information, and I think we found out the classic album. We found out some positives, we found out some negatives, and we found out some interestings, and maybe some conversation about developing what those interesting things are and how we're going to try to address them, are the ones where we need to be paying most attention. We will be delighted to work with you, so please, if you'd like to take the conversation a bit further, feel free to, or if you'd just like to discuss this or any other aspect of our work, it's always good to hear from you. Thanks for your time.